Hello everyone, this is the great Lord and Master, Osiron, the Eternal, for what's going to be Osiron Tarot Spiral 10. But I'm taking this back to the beginning, and this video is going to take the place of Osiron Tarot Spiral 1, the proto version, because I'm going to get into a couple key aspects here. One is going to be a basic overview of what the Osiron Tarot Spiral is. But the main thing I'm going to do here is cover how the tarot keys interact with the zodiac in a pictorial sense. And you see here, this is the Osiron Tarot Spiral with the proper planetary ring, which I cover in Part 8, the planetary deconception, and Part 7. But this shows how and why this is the proper planetary sequence for the deacons. And this uses, the Osiron Tarot Spiral uses the entire tarot. Okay? It uses the tarot trumps, which you see here going around a spiral. It uses the court cards, which show up here on the axis of the Great Lord, or the planetary axis. And the court cards show that the court cards are actually one of the most powerful aspects of the tarot. It really does. It covers a lot in this. It covers the precession of the equinox, but it also shows atomic structure, which I get into in Part 9. Really, really powerful. And in the court cards and how they relate to the precession, I cover in Parts 4 and 5, the Spear of Destiny. In Part 5 is like the historical timeline of events and how it relates to what I show in the Spear of Destiny. And down here is the pips. This is the order of the pips with the Osiron Tarot Spiral. The pips use a sequence of 0 through 9 as opposed to 1 through 10. And the aces take the place of 0. And the planetary order below these numbers is the secondary planetary aspect, which is fixed. And that uses the days of the week. But this planetary ring is the main one, and it starts in the axis of the Great Lord, goes around and ends here. I explain that in those videos. But now to get to the main presentation, which is going to be how the tarot keys, the tarot trumps relate to the zodiac. Because make no mistake, the tarot is first and foremost a pictorial representation of the zodiac before anything else. There's people in occult circles who like to think that the tarot is symbolic of the Tree of Life. It does work with the Tree of Life, but it's not primary. The tarot is primarily a zodiac transmission, as I'll show you. And it also shows up in the zodiac wheel, because if you take the houses, there's 12 houses in the zodiac, 1 through 12. If you add up all those numbers, 1 through 12, stacking each number as you go, the total comes to 78, which is a powerful link to because the tarot cards are 78 cards in total. So when you add up the houses, you get the 78. Okay, now, in the dead center of this is where the Fool goes. And this shows the power of the Fool, because everything emanates from that zero space of the Fool. The entire zodiac emanates from that. And then the precession or the spiral begins at the conception of the year. Because if you recall, the year has actually two beginnings. The year is conceived at the winter solstice, but it's actually born at the spring equinox. And the winter months are the womb months. That's the gestation period for the year. See, the way the trumps interact with the zodiac, it's actually shows the life of a man, of a human being, from conception to death. And we're seeing that here. This is the 0. The card number 1 is the High Priestess. And as one, there's people who may not like that idea, but you have to recall when the zodiac, when the tarot was first discovered, the cards weren't numbered, and it was discovered in the 14th century. So back then, if you had tried to say that card number 1 was a female card, or the High Priestess, you would have been burned at the stake. You probably had your family slaughtered along with you. So they could not do that. They had to put the Magician as 1 and the High Priestess as 2, but that's simply not the case. as I've shown in countless videos, the feminine precedes the masculine, and it does so here too in the Earth sign of Capricorn, and it's the High Priestess. Card number 2 is the Magician, and that is the masculine aspect of creation, electricity, duality. This is the action aspect, and this is why it's the Magician. Card number 3 is the Empress, and what the Empress does is give birth to the Emperor. Okay, they're not husband and wife. The Empress and the Emperor aren't husband and wife. The Empress is the mother of her child, which is the Emperor. Okay, and that takes us to the birth of the year at the equinox. And the first card above the abyss is the Emperor. And also I want to add, I forgot to add, this also follows cube geometry. This follows the tarot cube geometry. The 0 is the center point of the Fool. These 3 womb cards are the axes of the cube. These 6 upper cards above the abyss are the faces of the cube. And the double row on the outside in blue are the outer edges of the cube. So this follows cube geometry. This is how you get the tarot spiral. But then when you break into the above the abyss, we see the Emperor. Now the Emperor is usually shown as an old man in a chair, and he's a wizened emperor. But that's not the case. The Emperor is actually a baby. The Emperor is born here, and the Emperor is a baby. And so, and that's what he is. He's a baby. And we know that because the Emperor is a masculine figure, but he's born into a house that is ruled by a queen. Okay, and that's feminine. And what that's saying is the Emperor is still a baby. He's prepubescent. He's still a child. He's not a man yet. And this is why he's a baby here. And he's born, he's a baby, he's not a man yet. Now, the next card is the Hierophant. This would go here. Now, the Hierophant is a card that I've had a lot of issue with. And that is another card that if you had drawn it properly, you would have gotten burned at the stake. The original card, or older tarot cards, call it the Pope. But the Hierophant is actually drawn incorrectly. Now, in the zodiac, the cherubic positions are androgyne positions. Okay, that means they're both feminine and masculine. And this house is ruled by Earth, and this is ruled by water. So these two houses, even though they're androgyne, they're going to be dominantly feminine. So if you were to draw them, they should be a female image over the masculine. So the Hierophant is drawn as an old pope, a wise church guy, but really this should be a female character, perhaps instructing her child. There's a lot you could do with this. I'm still working on this. But you got to keep in mind, the house is an Earth sign, ruled by Taurus, ruled by Venus. It's Taurus. The planetary ruler of it in the cherubic position is Venus. This is actually ruled by Venus twice because the fixed aspect is also ruled by Venus. So you have 2 Venus rules here in the cherubic position. It's ruled by Venus. It's the Earth sign, which is feminine. So this is all feminine. And you'll also notice that in the planetary ring, I have them switching from red to blue. That's showing the gender dominance via the elements of each one. This is fire, so it's masculine. This is earth, so it's feminine. This is air, so it's masculine, and so on and so forth. That's how it goes. Now, one of the next cards, one of the most amazing positions of this Osiron Tarot Spiral is card 6, the Lovers. And that lands here in this house. Now, most cards show this as a young couple in love. But one of the oldest tarot cards show it as a man and there's 2 women with him. And some people say he has to make a choice between women, but that's not what that is. The 2 women, one of those women is the Emperor's mother, and the other card is his lover. So what's happening is the mother is now passing off her son who is going through puberty and becoming a man. The mother is passing off her son to the other woman in his life, which is going to be his queen. So that's what the Lovers mean. So the Lovers is symbolic of sexual maturity. And the number of the card, the Lovers, is 6, which is sexuality, or exertive sexuality. So that's what the Lovers is. It's the mother passing off her son, the Emperor, to his new woman, his new queen, which is his lover. That's why it's called the Lovers. And that's that. Now, in that, this is showing the stages of the emperor's life, the man's life. He's born here, he's an infant. Here he's an adolescent, still prepubescent. Here he's going through puberty. He's becoming awakened sexually, but he's not matured yet. He's just starting that process. Now at the top of the zodiac, which is the height of summer, or the solstice, is now when the emperor is a man. In this next season, the summertime, is when the emperor acts with his fullest power as a man. And then the next card we see here is the Chariot. The Chariot, as I've said before, represents the blood of the body. And what that means is the body is sexually alive now. See, the emperor is fully alive sexually. He's in his most powerful position. He's in charge of his own sexual energy. And that's what's being said by the Chariot. And then the next card, we're at the top of the axis. Now, this is the strongest point. These 2 months are the strongest seasons of the year. And the next, this is card 8. Now, this is another cherubic house. In 8, the strength card, in the weight deck, this is a good example, but the strength card is shown by a woman, an angelic woman, who is controlling, taming a lion. And this is pretty good imagery because it's cherubic, so the feminine aspect is dominant, as it always is, and the lion represents the masculine force. And so the feminine aspect is controlling the powers of the material world, which is represented as the masculine force of the lion. You could even equate that to Sophia properly controlling her creation, Yaldabaoth. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but the demiurge. So Sophia is properly controlling the demiurge in the proper way here. The demiurge didn't lose control and become Abrahamism in the perverse world we see today. Well, that's what we're seeing here. Now, the Hermit falls into house 9, and this is the final phase of the summer. This is where the emperor is. His powers are waning, and he's getting ready to hand over the reins of his rule to other people. This is the final aspect of his controlling life, where he's actually taking charge of things. Okay, he's getting ready to go below the abyss. And this is what we see with the Hermit in house 9. Now we go below the abyss. With the next 2 cards, we also jump out of the faces of the cube into the outer rows of the cube. And the first card we see here is 10, okay? And that's the Wheel of Fortune. And all that's really saying is that the wheels of fate and destiny continually turn, and there's no escaping that. You know, the Emperor now has crossed into a place where he's getting prepared for his death. This is a time for introspection. This is a time for he's making peace with himself. He's going to discover who he really is. And the reins of power, he may still be the king, but the actual duties of the realm are handled by other people now. He's handed off that to other people. He's focusing now on making peace with who he is as a being. And we see that with a 10. And this is confirmed by the next card, Justice 11. Now the card 11 is 2 1s. So what that's suggesting is he's actually seeing who he really is. He's facing himself in the introspective mirrors of who he is. He's analyzing who he is, who his life was, what his purpose and mission here in life is. And this is what is showing with 11. Now there's a lot going on with Libra as far as the scales of Libra and balance. And I get into that in part 3, Message of the Blood. And there's a lot with that, but I'm not going to cover that now, but there's a lot that goes with that. Now, the next card is one of the key parts of the Osiron Tarot Spiral, and one of the most fitting cards to land anywhere on this spiral is the Hanged Man, which is R212. And that lands in cherubic water, and I couldn't think of a more fitting spot for that to land. And what that's saying is the Emperor is getting ready to die. He knows he's going to die, but he's also illumined completely now. He understands the meaning of life. He understands why he was here. He understands the purpose of what he was doing here and what it all means, okay? He's illumined, but he's going to die. And now the next card, Death, is the Death. People say the Death card is only a symbolic metaphor for other things. Well, it's really not. The Death card is the Death card. The Emperor dies here. The Emperor dies here and he's dead. Now this brings us to one of the most amazing houses in the Osiron Tarot Spiral, and that is House 9, Sagittarius. There's a lot going on with this. Sagittarius is actually the alleyway between the non-physical and the physical. Okay, and it's a two-stage operation. See, Temperance, card 14 is Temperance, and that card is saying that the physical body, the ego, and everything that goes along with the identity of who the Emperor was is dissolving back into zero. The 1 of the 10, the 1 is becoming 0 again. Well, this is what is happening here. The 1 that was the Emperor, the ego identity of the Emperor, is becoming 0 again. And this is shown by Temperance. Now let me show you a picture of Temperance in the weight deck. What we see here, this is Temperance, okay? And what you'll see is an angelic figure with 1 foot on land, 1 in the water. You're also going to see the sun is setting in the west. That's symbolic of death. But now the cups, the angelic being is pouring a cup from the land side into the water side. That is again suggesting that the physical body and the ego identity of the individual that was the Emperor is becoming 0 again. This is what we see here. Okay. Now the next card. This is going to cause people to jump up and down and stomp their feet, but the Devil actually goes here in Sagittarius. And what that is the sexual aspect of rebirth. This represents the sexuality of duality of this sexed universe, and this is what this is, the Devil. And it actually belongs in Sagittarius. Now, the people, weight on the weight deck, they knew this, or at least it's either a huge coincidence, but this is the Devil card in the weight deck, okay? You're going to notice that the Devil is there, and the Devil is holding a torch, and that is pointing downward. And what that represents is the only fire sign below the abyss is that, the fire sign, that Sagittarius. It's telling you that is where this card belongs. And then the 2 chained people, the 2 chained humanoid figures, the man has a tail of fire, which represents Sagittarius, and the female, the woman, has a tail with grapes on it, which represents the earth of Capricorn. So it's telling you that this belongs there. And here's the Crowley version of the Devil, okay? It's a giant phallus. You can see the 2 balls and then the shaft of the phallus. Now this does have the goat on it for Saturn or Capricorn in the rings of Saturn, but it definitely does not belong there. Absolutely not. See, now these 2 cards, Temperance and the Devil, are cards 14 and 15. Now when you reduce those, it becomes a 5 and a 6, which is the heart of the true tree and the heart of the jewel. And this is the heart of the true tree. This is going back to 0, and the true tree is the emanation from 0 into the physical. And the Devil, or in the 6, is the heart of the jewel of creation, which is what the Kabbalistic tree that's presented in Kabbalistic circles really is the 6. That's why it's got the heart of the 6. And then what happens now, the next card is a powerful confirmation of this truth, okay? The next card is the Tower. And what the Tower is, what the Tower actually is an ejaculating phallus. That's what the Tower is. Now the phallus of the Devil, the sexual aspect of the Devil, his phallus is impregnating the High Priestess, And the ejaculation of that interaction is what the tower represents. The devil ejaculates into the waters of the high priestess, and this is what this card symbolizes. And then the very next card is symbolic of the conception. The new life is being conceived again with the star. This is what that means. But in this stage of the game, the body hasn't been ensouled yet. And this is a pretty big topic. But the child has been conceived, and that's what the star means. But there's no ensoulment yet. The soul hasn't bonded with the body yet. And actually, my last video, I talk about stargates and all that stuff. And this is why it's so important for us in this physical world to maintain our bodies and breed properly with other people and make sure our bloodline stays pure and strong, because the soul needs good stock to ensoul into. So if we're producing kids who are just freaks and all depraved and stuff like that, the soul isn't going to have a good choice of bodies to go into. So our task on this side of the fence in the physical world is to make sure that the souls have good bodies, good, strong, healthy bodies through proper genetics to ensoul into. And this is what the star means. The star is the fetus that was conceived, but it's not ensouled. Now, these next outer layer of the cards sort of show, these first cards are the axis cards, and these secondary outer cards are augmentations of what's going on with these initial axis cards. So they work hand in hand, they go together. As we see here, we got the high priestess here, and this is the action that's happening in the high priestess. The devil ejaculates into her, and then she conceives with a child. Same thing with the emperor. Now this is one of the most amazing positions in the entire Osiron Tower spiral. You got the magician, the magus. I had just said emperor, but it's not. It's the magician. The magician goes here, and his tools of creation is the feminine aspect of the moon and the masculine aspect with the sun. Okay? Now, you're going to see something very amazing here. In this house, Aquarius, its corresponding opposition house is Leo, and the planetary decan assignments that go along with Leo are Mercury, the moon, and the sun. And we're seeing that here. The magician is associated with Mercury, okay, and then we see the moon and the sun following it. So the planetary aspect is here, Mercury, moon, sun, and we're seeing that in the house below that, which is Mercury, and then the moon and the sun. And those are the tools of creation. And then the final house of Pisces is, you have, again, this is the Empress, but then you have Judgment, which represents the masculine aspect of activity. This is the life is about to be born, and this is, any living being is a masculine thing. So this isn't about men and women specifically, because any life that exists in the dual realm of the matrix, because it's alive, it's masculine. It doesn't matter what gender you are physically. Everybody's masculine here because we're alive. And this is what this represents. You're alive, everything's good, and then 21, the world, means you're being born into the world again. Right? And then when you add all these numbers and you reduce just these two, you got 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is like the pentagram. This is telling you the pentagram is being born again into the world again, and it starts all over again. So this is how that goes. Now, here, when it comes to the cherubics in the gender assignments with each of them, the dominant gender is going to be determined by the element of the house. So here, what is labeled the Hierophant as a man is actually dominantly female, as I went on to say, and the other one here is water, and that's going to be that too. Now up here, the figure, again, it's cherubic, but the figure of importance is both of them, but this is a masculine representation because of the 8. But the 8 is just made up of 2 elements of the 4 female elements and then the 4 masculine elements. And we see that with the card. Again, there's the woman, angelic woman, which represents Kundalini, the divine power, and the lion is the active masculine force or the material matrix. material matrix electricity being controlled by Kundalini. Now here's a different story, because this is actually two distinct sections. This is the axis cards, and this is the outer card. So these stay separated in the relation, because when you add these numbers up, it would total to 3, and that is obviously feminine, congruent with the masculine association of air. But these stay separate. So the magician is 2, and then the cards 18 and 19 reduce to a 1. Okay, so what that's telling you is the magician is using the power of the high priestess, which ultimately is Kundalini, the divine feminine force of beauty and truth. The magician is using that power, which is shown by these cards reducing to a 1, using the power of Kundalini to operate in the world. That's what this is saying. So we're seeing the 2-1 presentation. So the magician is the 2, and his tool that he's working with is the power of Kundalini, which is nothing more than the high priestess and the 1. Very powerful stuff. Now, one thing I want to get to is the Osiron Tarot Spiral also has a code that's produced with it, okay? And I explain that more in parts 2 and 3 in greater detail of what that code is. But the code is, the code is 136 163 199, then 136 163 199, and it ends with 136, okay? And we're seeing what happens here. Now, one of the cool parts about that is the secondary number, like you see a 1, 3, and a 6 here. Well, that 6 is canceled out by its opposing number. So we got 1 and 3, and then the 6 is turned off because it's canceled out with its 3 to produce a 9. And then the next one is 1, 6, 3, but the 3 is canceled out by the 6 to produce a 9. So the operating aspect is 1 and 3, and then the next one is 1 and 6. Well, 13 is death, and the 16 is the tower. Okay? Now, when you add 1 and 3, that gives you 4, and when you add 1 and 6 here, that gives you 7. And then when you add 7 and 4, that gives you 11, which reduces to a 2. And that is that. Now, in part 3 of the Message of the Blood, I actually started to allude to this, but I lost my train of thought and I just abandoned it. But this code that's generated by the Osiron Tarot Spiral actually has 13 steps. And we see here on the solstice axis, the bottom becomes a 9, and I explain that in part 2 and 3. And the top here reduces to a 4. And when you add 9 and 4, that becomes 13. Okay, and we're seeing the 13 steps of creation. Now what happens is, you got the 1, the 3, the 6, and that turning into 9 is 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th step is the 4. Okay, and then you got 6, 7, 8, and 9, and the 10th step is the 7. When you add these, it becomes 11, right? And then when 2 adds to 3, it becomes 5, which is the 12th. And then when the 2 adds to 6, it becomes 8, which is the 13 steps. And that's showing the machinations of the true tree of life. So what really happens on the tree of life, you could say, is the Kundalini pillar is ever pervasive and dominant. That's why it's over here. And the 3 plus 1 gives you 4. 6 plus 1 gives you 7. And then this is the body. The body is here. The 4 represents the elements, which is the body. And the 7 represents the blood, which is the blood of the body. This is now ready for ensoulment. And then when you add these up, it becomes 2. And then the life is here. Then the 2, the life force using Kundalini becomes 5. Then 2 plus 6 becomes 8. So it's showing the whole series of numbers of the number code with the machinations of the code that's revealed from the Osiron Tarot Spiral. See, all this links together. And one point I want to mention too that's really important is when you add both houses, these tarot numbers, and then these two, the total for all the numbers becomes 88. And when you put the Jewel of Creation back on the true tree to produce the Tree of the Great Lord, which I have videos about, these two Sephiroth become an 8 and an 8, which is 8 and 8, and that produces 16. Well, it's saying that here as well. So this becomes 16. in the axis of the Great Lord, which is what this is, I explain how that is derived in other videos, but real quickly what happens is these two tarot cards form a 3, it goes around, these two tarot cards become 6 via 15, and then when it goes around here, these 4 tarot cards become 7, and the reduced totals add up to 16 again, which is a tower. So this is like a giant phallus again. So this is how the axis of the Great Lord is derived. But it's not just a tarot that does that, because the axis of the Great Lord is also a planetary mirror. So the zodiac shows the axis of the Great Lord and the tarot, and they both confirm each other as that goes. So that should be it, I think. This is actually being done on another blue moon. This is the second blue full moon of 2018, and it's only March. So we had a blue moon in January, which is 2 full moons. February there was no moon. In March we had, again, 2 full moons. And today is a full moon. It's a big day as far as that goes. There's a lot going on today. It's Saturday. It's a full moon, a blue moon. It's also the first day of Passover, which is a big Jewish holiday. And it's also Saturday, which is, the god of the Jews, basically. Or, they worship Saturn in its perverse form, I have to add. They worship Saturn as a male god, but as we know, Saturn is primarily, dominantly feminine with a masculine aspect, as I've explained in other videos. So this is it. This is the Osiron Tarot Spiral, the lost keys of the zodiac. And thank you for watching, and namaste. Okay, what we have here is the Osiron Tarot Spiral. And up here we have a cube. We have the tarot keys laid out in their cube geometry structure. And all of these are interrelated. As we know, the Osiron Tarot Spiral is laid out using cube geometry. We have the Fool in the center here, and we see that in the center of the cube. We have the 3 axis cards, or the God cards, here shown in green. We have the 6 faces here shown in red on the cube, and then the 12 outer cards shown in blue on the cube. And over here, we see it here, and they're all color-coded to be congruent. See, one of the issues that I had with the other video is how I kept talking about the cube in 666, and this actually goes back to Proof of God 4, way back a couple of years ago when I talked about this, but the cube is best represented by 369, or just 9 directly, not 666, because there's no real link to the cube in 666 other than abstract metaphor, really. Because what we see here is the 12 outer edges of the cube, which reduce to 3 to give us a 3. And then we have the 6 faces of the cube for the 6. And then for the 9, what we get is the center point plus the 8 corners, which is again showing a 1-8 configuration with the cube. So that's best with 3, 6, and 9. And also, if we take one of the faces here, that's comprised of 4 90-degree corners, and 4 times 90 gives us 360, and you multiply that by 6, gives us 2,160, which is, again, 1 section, 1/12 of the great year. So we're seeing the link with the cube and the number 12 all over the place, and we're going to see it over here, too, because this is separated into 3 and 6. The faces, when you add up the numbers, reduce to 3 for the faces, and then the outer edge of the cube, when you add the numbers up, reduce to 6 to give you a 3, 6. But also, the columns, each of the columns reduce to 3, 6, 9, and 3, 6, and 9. But it separates in 2 key distinct groups. This first group of 4, all the numbers in there are Kundalini numbers of 3, 6, and 9, whereas the last 2 here are all terrestrial numbers. But what happens is, this 30 becomes a 3, this 33 becomes a 6, this 36 becomes a 9, and then this 39 becomes a 12 before it becomes a 3 again. So we're seeing the 3, 6, 9, and 12 presentation done in 4 steps. Well, that's the zodiac. We have the 4 quadrants of the seasons, and then we have the 12 houses. So we're seeing the link with the zodiac and the cube here in this first section. And then the terrestrial numbers show up as 42 and then 45, which reveal a 6. See, this first group reduces to a 3, and this second group also reduces to a 6 to give you a 3, 6 presentation. So, and we're seeing a lot with this here. See, the cube in this presentation is actually separated into 2 distinct sections. We have the axis cards, which really don't exist, all the axis cards really do is establish the aspect of 3 dimensions for the cube, and then once that happens, the cube itself is represented by these 18 cards, which is again 1 and 8. And so it separates it, and because the face cards reduced to a 6, and it gives us a 6, and the cube cards reduced to a 9, and we're seeing that here. We're seeing a 6 and a 9 show up here. As a matter of fact, each of these rows, the first row reduces to 39, the second row here reduces to 75, and then the third row reduces to 111. Well, the separation between these numbers is also 36. If you take 111 and subtract this, it's 36, and you take this number and subtract 39, it reveals 36. And 36 times 2 is 72, so we're seeing a lot of powerful numbers. And the reason there's a 666 here, and the reason that's in 3 rows, is because it takes 3 steps at its widest to reduce, and it takes a total of 9 steps to reduce as well. So the axis cards reduce to 6 in 1 step. This row here, the face, is reduced to 3 in 3 steps. This row reduces to 3 in 3 steps. And this last row reduces to 3 in 2 steps. So we have a 1 plus 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 and 9. So 9 steps to do that. And that gives you a 666. But that only gives you a 666 if you add the axis cards. If you take away the 6, which doesn't really exist, then it's a 9. So it reduces to 9. So the cube is best represented by 9, not 6. Well, I mean, the cube is 6 because it's 6 faces, but I'm talking about the actual relation, the triple numbers, But that's what that does. So there's a lot going on with this. And also, every 3 numbers reveal a 6 in this structure as well. So if you take 6 times 6, that gives you 36. So we're seeing 36 all over the place. Also, the Osiron Tarot Spiral itself shows 3-6 separation multiple places. See, one of the reasons why the winter is considered the womb is because that's comprised of 9 cards, and they reduce to 9, which is 9 plus 9 is 18, so we're seeing the 18 again. We see the 18 here in the cards, we see the 1 and 8 with the center and the edges here, and then we have the 18 actual face cards with the cube here, so 18 is huge in the cube as well. But the rest of it is comprised of 3 seasons, and all the numbers in those 3 seasons reduce to a 6 for a total of a 3-6 separation, but each quadrant does it too. See, this quadrant is comprised of 3 cards, and the total reduces to a 6. This quadrant is comprised of 3 cards, and the total reduces to a 6. This quadrant is comprised of 6 cards, and the total reduces to a 3. So we're seeing that here. So we're seeing a lot of powerful links in relation to the 3-6 separation aspect with this too, all over the place. And even, you see this little man here? This man is a 10 next to it. Well, as I've explained before, the Osiron Tarot Spiral is actually a fractal of many aspects of life, but one of those is the life of a man. See, the man is conceived in Capricorn here, and then this is the womb, the gestation period. The man is born in Aries, and then he goes around and he ultimately dies with the death card at the end of Scorpio. In House 9, Sagittarius, is an alleyway between worlds, which I get into in the first part of the series. But the life of the man is comprised of using only 10 cards. It begins in Aries here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then he dies with the 10th card, the death card in Scorpio. In the death card in the weight deck even shows a man, the king lying prone on the ground, dead, being mourned by his family. So there's a lot, that's a lot going on with that. And there's a lot going on with a lot of this. This even shows the true tree of life and the jewel in the presentation here, because we have 5 rows that go down. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 6 columns go across for the 6, and all of that. And there's actually one mistake I made on the other presentation too. I put a 150 down here, and that was supposed to be a sign of the cherubics and the other one, but it's really not. See, it really separates into 3 sections, even sections. They're all even too. The cardinals become 66, the cherubics become 77, and the mutables become 88. And the total of that is 231, which reduces to a 6. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. The number correlations with the Osiron Tarot Spiral are just amazing. There's just so many little things. I mean, to sit here and pick it all apart would just be nauseating to listen to, and you know what I mean. But there's a lot going on in here, and one of those aspects is what's really going on with the womb here. See, these three cards are actually the God cards, and they represent a different aspect of the God principle, sort of like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, or the Holy Trinity. Well, we're seeing that here. We got the High Priestess, the Magician, and then the Empress. And these are just all aspects of the same God force, basically. We have the fertility and the primal essence of the feminine, which is what everything's about. We have the illusion of duality here, which is the masculine aspect. And then we have the Empress here, which represents fertility, abundance, you know, life ripe with potential, basically, a lot of things, but that's what that represents. So we're seeing the God aspect here. And the Osiron Tower Spiral is also meant to be viewed after the cards are laid down. So it's not a question of putting one card then the other, so to speak. What really happens is you lay out the cards using the cube geometry, and then when it's finished, you read it complete. So that's why these cards, these secondary cube cards, augment the first card so beautifully, because that's how it was meant to be. There's one other thing I want to get to too that's really important. The High Priestess association, because I say the High Priestess is card 1 and she belongs in this house here. I want to get into that a little bit deeper, because every now and then I'll get into arguments with people and they don't understand that concept. You know, some people are just retarded and aren't going to understand, but for everyone else who actually can, you know, process things, I want to get into this a little bit. Okay, what we see here is the card, the High Priestess. Try to make it look nice. We see the High Priestess, and she's surrounded by 2 pillars. You see her dress turns into flowing water and saturates the earth. And you also see a little crescent moon in the corner here. And behind her you see a veil. There's a veil that's separating this world and the other world. Well, all these play key factors in why she goes here. Because, as we know, the High Priestess is associated with water. But don't forget, she is the archetypal feminine principle, okay? So she is everything feminine. And what are the two feminine elements of the root elements? Water and earth. Okay, well, what we see here is Capricorn, which is the conceived house where life is conceived, and that is earth. And then what is the High Priestess, or the water, or the blood of the High Priestess, saturates the ground here. And then the spark of life from the phallus of the devil, which is the tower, ignites the spark of life with fire here. So we're seeing 3 key elements here. We're seeing earth, water, and fire. And it isn't, and then what happens is that produces the fetus, which is the star, but it's not ensouled yet, and it's only a waiting vessel for the soul to inhabit. And we see that in the next house, which is the Magician, and the actual data stream, and so I guess you could say the programming of the body that is going to be produced is done with the Magician. And then finally in the last house here, 20 is actually a card that I think is the actual birth card and the ensoulment. I think this might, the ensoulment may happen with 20. You know, because I'm trying to figure out where the actual ensoulment takes place. It either takes place in the house of the Magician with the moon and the sun, or it happens here in 20. And 21, the card 21 is a very interesting card. That actually takes on new meaning in the tarot deck once you figure out what's actually going on. And this realization just came to me the other day. What the world, card 21, actually represents is the continual concept of the unknown. So no matter what world you're in, there's always going to be an element of uncertainty in it. There's always going to be that veil of the unknown in every world. So for the baby in the womb, the veil of uncertainty is the pre-birth state. So as that baby has no idea what's going on outside the world. So as that baby is being born, that is the uncertainty phase for the fetus. And for us as living beings, the uncertainty phase is death here. So when we die, we have no idea what goes on in this house from our perspective. And this last card, 21, the world, is sort of the card that on a whole, and a greater whole, represents the continual uncertainty of every world that we enter. So, after we die here in this world, and whatever happens to us next, we can bet there will, somewhere within that, there will be a level of uncertainty, and that's what this card means. So the world could actually be, of all the cards in the tarot, the world could be the big question mark card. And as in, we don't really know what's over there, and we never will. And there's always going to be that element in whatever life you're in. Because uncertainty is what life is all about, is what makes life exciting, is what makes life worth living, is that element of uncertainty, and it's always going to be there, and it shows up with the world. But getting back to the High Priestess, so the High Priestess is here, and she is everything that's feminine, and she gets impregnated by the devil, the phallus becomes the star. But now there's some other correlations too, because on the card I showed the little moon on the bottom of that, and the High Priestess is also associated with the moon. Well, the first two planetary deacons to appear in here are both the moon. It's double moon. So on the actual ring of planets here, the moon begins it here. The first deacon is the moon. And then when you use the secondary planet aspects, which I explained in other videos, the first one to go there is the moon. So the first deacon of Capricorn is ruled by double moon. And then, that's all. This card is screaming High Priestess. It's all feminine. Capricorn is earth, which is feminine. The High Priestess is water, which is feminine. There's a lot going on here. So indisputably, and even in nature, I mean, as I have videos that explain this, that the female principle, it precedes the masculine in every aspect. I mean, so it's a no-brainer. Once you figure out what's going on with the tarot, there's just absolutely no doubt as to the fact that the High Priestess is the card one and belongs here. And also, there's also pillars on that card too. And we see over here in the structure something going on with the pillars. See, there's a woman sitting between two pillars. Well, there's two pillars here. You got the High Priestess taking the left, and you got the Empress taking the right, and you got two pillars. And then the Magician is in the middle of those. And this structure can break down following in the middle of their two pillars. 9 cards here and 9 cards here. And 9 plus 9 is 18. So we're seeing a lot of this amazing correlation too. Now there's also something else I want to get into that's pretty important. You see how there's numbers at the apex of every one of these 4 lines here, the equinox line and the solstice line? Well, how these numbers come to be, which I explained before, is if you add all the tarot cards on either side of the line, it reduces to one of these numbers. Here it's a 9, up here it's a 4, and over here, see, I have a 7 and a 100, and that's a little deceptive in a way, but there is a valid reason why they're there, because if you add 3 and 4, that becomes 7. And if in the line over here, the stacked totals go from 45 to a 55, and when you add those up, it becomes an even 100. Or we even see here 9 plus 1 is 10. So, but the way it really should be in its finished state would be all the cards on this side add to it, and what happens when you do that is this becomes a 12, which reduces to a 3, and over here the same thing, this becomes a 12, which reduces to a 3. So now we're seeing again a 33 correlation. We got a 3 on this side and a 3 on this side, so again we're seeing 33 here doing that. So see, they both have value. This 8 line is also a infinity line, which I explained in part 2. The Osiron Tarot Spiral in its zodiac form is nothing more than a pictorial layout of the tarot cards using their cube geometry form, which is here. So when you take the cube geometry and lay it around the zodiac, it tells the story of the creation of man on several fractal levels. Because this is the life and death of a man, but this is the life and death of a lot of things. This is the basic. This is basically telling the story of various cycles of life on several fractals. I mean, this is very, very powerful here, what it's doing. So, and the beauty of this is that because there is other versions of the Tarot Cube out there, and I explained that in the Tarot Cube video. I think I changed the name of it to the Cube of Space, because that's what this cube would be in Kabbalistic circles, the cube of space, and they assign tarot cards to it too, but the order is all messed up, and it's not this. Once you figure out what's going on with this and you assign the tarot keys properly to this cube, and then take the layout that's derived from that and wrap it around the zodiac wheel, it tells a beautiful story of creation, and they both support each other 100%. I mean, this validates this as being true, and this validates this as being true. It's integrated. They are all one, and there is no separation. So I can say without a doubt that this is absolutely what the tarot is meant to be. Absolutely what it's meant to be, using cube geometry, number code, and the zodiac. So thank you, and namaste. This is going to be part 2 of the Tarot Zodiac Spiral. In part 1, if you remember, I made a video shortly after discovering this. I called it the alternate version of the tarot trumps, or tarot keys. And now I'm changing that definitively. This isn't the alternate version. This is the version. This is the secret of the tarot. One of the secrets of the tarot, but this is perfect in every way. It not only works mathematically, it works pictorially, symbolically, in every way. This is what the tarot was designed to be. The tarot, the zodiac, aspects of geometry, the tree of life, the cube, and probably the rest, all work together seamlessly. And the tarot is the key that links them all together. It's absolutely amazing. What this is, this could be the magnum opus itself here. This is how powerful this is. This is sublime. Now, what you're going to see is a bunch of weird numbers on this. What these numbers are, is if you take the tarot cards, okay, and you start with the Fool in the middle, and everything comes from that. But if you start with 1, the High Priestess, and she is the rightful one, definitively. If you start with the High Priestess and start stacking the tarot cards on top of each other, this is what you get. Okay, you got the 1 of the High Priestess, and then if you stack the 2 on top of that, it becomes 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. Then, if you stack the 6 on top of that, 6 plus 3, 3 plus 6, because this card is 3, so it goes 1, 2, 3, so if you add the previous card and you keep stacking them, then it becomes 6. Then if you add 4, which is the Emperor of the next card, to 6, it becomes 10. If you add 5 on top of that total, it becomes 15. If you add 6 on top of that total, it becomes 21. And it goes all the way around like that. So what you're seeing with all these jumble of numbers here is in the number in the center of the square or the card shape is the digital root of the combined totals of the stacking of the cards, if that's making sense. And then the number that's on top of these, this is the best place to show that, the number that's either on the side or on top of it, depending on how it fit, is going to be the total that adding the next card reveals. And then in the case of the first one that we see, 6, 10 plus 5 is 15, right? So that's 15, but the root of 15 is 6. 5 plus 1 is 6, so that's what you're seeing in here. And on top of that is that. So then you got 15 plus 6 is 21. 21 plus 7 is 28. 28 plus 8 is 36. And on it goes. And it ends with the last card being 21, the world, but that adds to 231, and that reduces to 6. Okay? Following? And what you get when you do that, okay, is you see over here, I have, because it's kind of hard to see what's going on unless you're staring at it, but this is what it ends up revealing. Remember, this starts in winter, remember, at the conception of the year, and this is what we have over here with winter. Winter produces a code of 136, then you jump into spring, and you get 163. Then you jump into summer, and you get 199, and you're going to see a powerful significance of what that represents, the two nines there. And then you go into autumn or fall, and you see again 136. But in this case, there's two because there's two cards being used. Now you get two sets of numbers. So in the fall, below the abyss, you get 136 and 163 in that order. And then you cross the line back into winter again, and you get again the 199, and then it ends with 136 again at this line. Okay? And then, with the final two cards of the zodiac spiral, can you see me? With the final two cards of the zodiac spiral, you get Judgment, which is 20, and then the World, which is 21. But the stacked numbers of those come to 210 and then 231. Well, if you add those two cards together, it becomes 441. And that, of course, reduces to 9, and that's what ends the whole thing with 9. But the significance of 441 being that number isn't just the fact that it reduces to 9. It breaks it down into the elements and, the divine holy power of Kundalini. So we get the element, you get one masculine expression of the element with 4. You get one feminine aspect of the elements with the other 4. And then you get Kundalini itself represented as 1. And that becomes that. This is an amazing discovery that I made. This is huge. This is on the same level as anything else I've discovered in this series so far. It is just stunningly mind-blowing here. Alright, what you see here is the sort of stripped down Osiron tarot spiral, and we just see the zodiac mainly. And in what's going on here, this is basically right now showing this. Okay, and this is, I call this the caduceus, the staff of Hermes, because it looks like it. In the middle here you got the planets, the rod, and then on either side you got the oscillating polarity spiraling up the column. And then when you add the court cards, it adds a whole new dynamic to it. But you're going to notice that if you follow the simple rule of feminine, masculine, and the child, or queen, king, and then the prince, it shows this going around in a counterclockwise motion. It starts out with queen, then king, then prince, then again with queen, king, prince, and then it descends with queen, king, prince, queen, king, and prince, and it keeps going in a counterclockwise processional vortex. And over here you see that with the wheel, and you can see all the court cards in their house going around in a counterclockwise motion. Well, what that represents is the precession of the equinox. In case you don't know what that is that our Earth has a wobble, okay? And it takes roughly 26,000 years for it to complete one cycle, okay? But the exact number they give to it is 25,920 years, okay? Now, if that is the actual number, it is an extremely amazing number because it happens to reduce to 9, but it doesn't just reduce to 9. If you take these numbers, 25,920, and use the comma as a natural demarc, it separates the numbers into 7 with 25, and then 9 plus 2 is 11 for 2, and that gives you 7 and 2. And as we know, the 7 and the 2 is the blood of the body and the primal masculine aspect of electricity, 7 and 2. But now, if you take that 25,920 year cycle and divide it by 12, it becomes 2,160 for each sign. So that's how many years it takes to get through each sign. Well, it just so happens that 2160, again, if you use the comma as a demarc point, separates the numbers into two groups of 2 and then 7, which of course become 9. And you'll notice that 72 and 27, coincidentally enough, also happen to be the center of the Kundalini grid mandala. When you write out the numbers, on that video, you'll see what that is. But the very center of the mandala is 72 and 27. Well, that's what we get from the processional numbers. It's absolutely stunning. And I guess as a rough way, I think some people, roughly call the precession cycle 24,000 years, and that probably is a rough number. And that's just a way to, so you can quickly, off the top of your head, calculate 2,000 years for each sign. But, if the exact number is, 25,920, that's really amazing for the reasons I just explained. But the precession goes backwards through the zodiac. So if this goes forward, if the zodiac goes clockwise, the precession goes counterclockwise. And what happens with the elemental order when you do that is it shows the Kundalini awakening and rising up the spine within man. It starts out with your body in Capricorn, the pure feminine Capricorn. It starts out with the body, and then the Kundalini awakens in the sacral region, the fire, and then it rises up to the heart chakra, and in this first instance here, the water is in cherubic water, which is masculine and feminine. And then the next one, it rises up to the mind in Libra for the mind, for the illumined mind of man. The Kundalini is risen to the top. And then once that happens, it jumps into a new section, a new segment, and it repeats. Earth, fire, water, air, and it jumps into a new segment. Earth, fire, water, and air, and it completes and goes around. Well, you're going to notice, if you're familiar with the concept of the yugas in India, this looks a lot like it could be broken up into the yugas. I know it's not exactly how they say that yugas are, but the yugas are an age. And right now, in this lower section here, these two would be the Kali Yuga, and then up here where the 6 is would be the Golden Age, and it goes around like that. And the reason I have this sectioned off like this, these two, because these would be the Kali Yuga, but these also, coincidentally enough, correspond to the houses of Saturn, the 2 houses of Saturn right here. It's a spear shape. I call this a spear of destiny, because these 2 houses of Saturn are in this shape, and they come into a spear point when you isolate them. And the reason I isolate them like that and call that the Kali Yuga, there's 2 reasons. If you begin the year at the conception here in Capricorn, remember this is the womb, and then the year is born again in Aries, but this is the womb. Well, if you conceive here in these 2 areas, if you use a human pregnancy period as a model, usually, if the baby is born within any of the first 2 trimesters, the baby's not going to live. I mean, if the baby comes out of the body within the first 2 trimesters, usually that baby's not going to live. There might be some rare exceptions, but generally speaking, the baby's going to die if it is born within these 2 houses. But then, once it gets into the 3rd trimester, which is Pisces, the baby has a pretty strong chance of surviving no matter when it's born. It may be really messed up if it's born here, but if it's born too early in here. But generally in this 3rd window is when it's safe to say you're going to have a successful pregnancy. And this is that. But conversely, the other way, if you're going the other way, right now you have the body, but the Kundalini hasn't yet awoken in it. But then once you break out of Saturn and get into Jupiter, and what is Jupiter? The gracious father that gives. Jupiter is jovial. Jupiter is a kind-hearted father who gives to you. And what he's giving to you in this case is the gift of fire, of life itself with Kundalini. And now it awakes. But there's many people who live their whole lives in their body and never awaken Kundalini. They are stuck in the Saturnian realm of the Kali Yuga. And I have that said right here, the Kali Yuga, the closed cube of Saturn. Because this, what is now a diamond shape, or the spear tip of the spear of destiny, is actually, it kind of looks almost like a square or a cube. And if any life that happens or doesn't happen in here isn't going to live. You know, people spend their lives in their bodies as a prison cell in this case, and they never live because they never awaken Kundalini. And the other way is after you're conceived, if you come out of the body in these first two, you're going to die. Basically, so this is what this is. This is the Saturnian realm of death. You know, this is what this is. But it's not that Saturn's bad, because Saturn isn't bad. The only thing bad about Saturn is what the Jew did to Saturn. But that now it's going backwards. Now you got to notice something. There's so much here. There's so much information here. I really just don't know where to begin, as I'm just shooting from the hip. But you're going to notice in the beginning of it, it breaks itself into 4 quadrants mainly. You know, on this planetary axis, and then it equally divides with the elements on this line and then this line, and it gives itself a group of 4 quadrants. Well, when it first begins, it highlights the Queen, okay? It begins Queen, King, Prince, and ends with Queen. Well, this is the house, this is the realm of cherubic water, and that the water element, the Queen, is dominant here. In the next one, it begins with the King, and it goes King, Prince, Queen, King, and this is the cherubic realm of fire, and fire is dominant here. The next one begins with Earth at the Prince. It goes Prince, Queen, King, and then ends with Prince again, and this realm is the realm of Earth. Okay, and so it breaks down those elements. And now the only element in this scenario which isn't being used is air. In this particular one, air doesn't get used here. But again, air is just like the mind. This is more the physical aspects here, you know. But it breaks that down like that. And there's also another aspect to this that you'll notice. If using, again, the planetary axis here, this procession hinges on the axis. And it begins here, and it rises, going through its Queen, King, Prince, Queen, King, Prince. And now it's at the apex, or the golden age of the Yuga cycle. And then its descent begins with water, which is Queen, King, Prince, Queen, King, Prince, and then it ends. Well, that also happens to be how the elemental order of the various signs go. In the beginning here, the cardinal signs also mirror the aspect of Kundalini awakening with man. With the cardinals are earth, fire, water, and air. And we see here earth, fire, water, and then air. The mutables go in the same as the descension. Water, air, earth, fire. And we got water, water, air, earth, and then fire. And it goes again. The cherubics form an elemental order too, but the cherubics precess. Now the first cherubic is air, and then the next one is water, fire, then earth. Air, water, fire, then earth. And that processes backwards as well. And that also shows you the basic concepts of the numbers at their root of 0, 1, 2, 3, and then when you combine those it becomes 6 for the masculine mask of Kundalini. And life is about exertion. You know, you were born in this world to live, to exert. Everything about this world is about effort, about exertion, about giving, about learning how to express yourself in this world through exertion. You know, obviously it's important to be receptive too. You got to be both, but you got to be receptive and then you exert. It's both. It's a two-way stream, and you have to be good at both. Now, I want to highlight a point right now about the Osiron Tarot Spiral. If you remember how this axis gets constructed, it's also, the planets on each side are the same. But it also, the tarot cards that correspond here create the 3-6 axis. The first card and the second card become 3, okay? And this 3 gives birth to the 6 as it goes around, okay? And then once the 6 is born, then it begins to exert, and that 6 was derived from the cards that go here. 7 and 8 become 15, the devil, which is 6. Now it exerts. And then as it exerts to go back around, once it comes back to here again, if you remember the houses of the tarot cards for both of these houses become 10 and then 1. And if you add that 1 to the 6 up here, it becomes 7, which is the blood. Remember the blood, the spirit enters the blood or the fluids of the body first. Okay? And that is the blood of Jesus. Because remember, the spear of destiny, if you know what that is, the spear of destiny is supposed to be the spear that pierced the side of Jesus as he was on the cross. Okay, that's what the spear of destiny is. And this is the spear point piercing, and it shows itself piercing the blood of Jesus. And so, and it's going down from 6-2-3 to form 7-2. So that's reminiscent of the phallus, of the masculine seeking the feminine in this case, in giving life, and the first spark of life is in the blood. And on the Osiron Tarot Spiral, that would be the first card here that enters the waters after the High Priestess. After the spiral goes around, the first card to enter here is the Tower. Well, the Tower is a fucking ejaculating phallus. That's what the Tower is. That's why it's blowing off the top of its crown on the Waite Smith deck. That's why the Tower blows up. The Tower doesn't blow up because God's mad at it. The Tower blows up is because it's a phallus that is ejaculating into the waters of the woman. And the next card after that, it begins the gestation period all over again. That's why the Tower is there. It's the devil, and the last card, if you remember, the last card in Sagittarius is the devil. Well, that devil's cock is entering into the waters of the High Priestess and ejaculating in her, creating life. So the Tower is not only an ejaculating phallus, but it's also the initial spark of life, too. That's what the Tower means. The Tower isn't this ill, foreboding thing. And then you notice the spear point's driving downward. Well, that's 6-2-3. Bam, driving downward. So that's what that's doing. This is just absolutely amazing. I think I got to this, didn't I? The percent. Yeah, I did. Yeah, the elemental orders of the cardinal, mutable, and cherubic signs. The cardinals are ascension, the mutables are descension, and the cherubics precess backwards. And all of it shows the awakening of Kundalini or the rise of man. So right now, this is the Kali Yuga. Mankind itself is in Kali Yuga. Our world right now is in Kali Yuga. It rises up through the zodiac in a backwards fashion. It gets to the golden age, which here is Leo and then water. And then it goes back down, all the way down, until it dies again back into the cube of Saturn, where it dies again in the cycle of man ends, the destruction. Now here's a bit of sort of bad news, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. Everyone says we entered the age of Aquarius, okay? And everyone also says that that was a time we break out of the Kali Yuga and begin our rise to the Golden Age again. Well, if this chart is accurate, we haven't even experienced Kali Yuga yet. Because some people say we just entered the age of Aquarius, and the 2,000-year age before this was the age of Jesus, and that was Pisces, and the time before that would have been the time of the Egyptians, the Aries, the Ram, or maybe the Jew, because the Aries, the Ram, and before here may have been the time of the Egyptians with Hathor, the cow goddess. In here, it's something like that, but this could be ancient Egypt. This could be pre-Roman times with Aries and the Jews and all that shit. And then the time of Jesus is Pisces, and they're saying we just entered Aquarius. Well, guess what? We are in the beginning of the death knell for humanity. If this chart is accurate, what this means is one life cycle has already begun. We've already had our golden age, and now we've already descended, and now we are at the very end of the line. We are at the time of the ultimate. Basically, you could view that as Armageddon. You could view that as a time when humanity destroys itself. If this is accurate, we very well could be living in an age right now where this is the end for the world for the world as we know it. This very well could be the end of days that we just entered here. You know what I mean? Everything basically hinges on how accurate is the estimation that we are in the age of Aquarius. How far, but it doesn't matter how close we are. But if we just entered the age of Aquarius, we still have 2,000 years of suffering to go before the world ends and is born anew again. But with the way our life is now, look at the world we live in. Most of the people are so fucking stupid. They have no idea that they are owned by the Jew. They have no idea they're slaves. A lot of the world is just, especially here in the U.S., the people have no clue. All they do is go to work every day, come home and eat, stuff their face, and watch TV and go to sleep. They don't know anything. Most people are so ridiculous. They have their emotions stimulated by the news. They freak out because the news presents a narrative that they want them to believe, which happens to be run and controlled by the Jew. And we are living in a time, basically, for a lot of aspects, hell on earth. I mean, the human race is on the brink of destruction. We are on the brink of World War III. Everyone's fighting. Everyone hates each other. No one is healthy. Everyone's sick. Everyone's fat. Everyone's disgusting. Everyone is angry. Everyone's, all the negatives you can associate with it. Now, that's not true for everybody. A lot of people are, but still, people who are awake have to live in a world with all those people. I always said the punishment, not always, but I said recently that the price for waking up in this world is waking up in this world, because everyone around you is in a fucking comatose state. They have no idea what's going on. They have no idea what illumination is. And we live in right now an age of the atheist. And atheism, as I said before, is symptomatic of the effects of Abrahamism, cutting humanity off from the divine sources, Kundalini. I mean, most atheists, ironically, are proud to be atheists, but that's one of the worst things you can be, because it is basically an admission that you are cut off from divine source, and you don't even know it. That's the thing. That's why it's so bad. Because Abrahamism in the beginning with Christianity and Islam and all that had to use a spiritual vehicle to poison mankind. But now that has been going on for so long, 2,000 years of Jesus, now people are just being born without even the slightest conception of God or divinity or Kundalini or holy power. They're born dead, they're born living zombies, and they die living zombies. And this is showing us here. They never get out of the 10, out of the cube of Saturn. They never awaken Kundalini. They are born here and they die here. And the same thing the other way. They are born here and they die here. They never leave this spear tip of the Spear of Destiny, which is the houses of Saturn or the Kali Yuga. This fractalizes out in all the ways. And one thing about the Spear of Destiny, the Spear of Destiny at one point was acquired by Adolf Hitler. And I see you see my swastika here again, which is an ancient Aryan symbol. But look at how the swastika is. It shows itself going, spiraling in what would be a counterclockwise motion. In this angular position, it's set on the cherubic signs. And the cherubic signs precess, to give you this code, the cherubic signs precess, and this swastika is shown moving in a processional direction, or a counterclockwise processional vortex. One last thing, one quick thing. This over here, this says Sacred Universe, and this shows the court cards, how they apply to the Tree of Life, or the True Tree. You got the queen, the king, and then the prince here. But then you have the other side of the prince here, which is the earth. And it shows the interchange. So this is Jesus, this is Krishna, this is you interacting with the divinity that is. And you can see it's in the shape of an upside down triangle when you do that. It looks sort of like a sacred yoni of a woman, and then it gives birth to the world here. This is what this is through the court cards. So the title of this is The Procession of the Court in the Yuga Kingdoms. Because this is broken down elementally into Yuga sections. And each one highlights the cherubic element that's in there. So there may be more. There's so much going on here. This video may have been premature. I was sort of contemplating just sitting on it and waiting to do it tomorrow, but I'm kind of hot for it right now, and I want to get it out there because But I think I captured the main gist of what's going on. Is that the court cards in the tarot represent a processional counterclockwise aspect of the zodiac that reveals the precession of the equinox, and it uses the axis of the great Lord as its foundational, pivotal thing. So that is that. Thank you and namaste. Here, this is sort of more of like a timeline of human history, because if you remember, the Spear of Destiny here separates itself into what appears to be Yuga-like separations, age of man separations. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video so much is because you can see here the tip of the Spear of Destiny. We are in the age of Pisces, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you see it's separated into three distinct sections. You got this, the tip of the spear, and then you got this section here, and this section here. And that's separated by the order of elements. Well, it just so happens that our accepted human history begins right at this line here with ancient Sumeria at about 3500 BC. And also, the dates I use are rough dates. I mean, I was using rough dates. I mean, they're accurate, but they're rough. I mean, they're not absolutely precise. So, Sumeria begins at about 3500 BC. If we count this as 0, and if we roughly estimate each sign being 2,000 years, well, we get 2,000 and 4,000 right at this line. So Sumeria comes onto the scene right at this separation age line. And it's followed by Egypt at 3100 BC. The Greeks come on the scene at about 1200 BC. Rome has its thing at, between 500 BC to 500 AD, followed by the Dark Ages for another about 400 years after that. And the Vikings show up at North America at about 1000 AD. Columbus, we all know, 1492. The crypto Jew Columbus shows up to North America. And then the modern age begins with the industrial age at about 1800 AD. I mentioned earlier about us still being in the age of Pisces. In the previous video, I kept saying Aquarius because there was lots of people that think that at the year 2000 we jumped into the age of Aquarius. Well, that's not really true. Again, 2000 would be the rough estimation of time, but remember, each age is broken up into 2,160 year cycles for the precession, and if the 0 of the new era of the Christian calendar is accurate, and it's fairly accurate for the start of Pisces. It could be off by a couple hundred years, but it's fairly accurate. And with each age being 2,160 years, we are still firmly planted at the very end of the age of Pisces, right here. So we are knocking on the door of the Saturnian realm of 0. in what could very well be the real Kali Yuga. Again, there's people who, that's going to require more research on my part to figure out exactly when and why they say the Yuga ages are what they are. But remember, a lot of information that's presented to us at face value needs to be explored deeper, as as I have shown clearly with the Kabbalistic tree of life, because and that could be the same thing with the Yugas too. And because one of the things, because of this line, this demarc point here shows our beginning with Sumeria right at this line. I mean, how coincident? That's a pretty big coincidence. That a separation of an age is also the beginning of our age, our accepted age of humans being, building cities and shit with Sumeria. But there is a fact that's been discovered recently, and that's the site of Göbekli Tepe. That's a site that has been absolutely confirmed to be about 12,000 years old from now, or about 10,000 BC. That's been dated to then, and that's not that's not speculation. That's proof fairly ironclad that an advanced civilization existed at 10,000 BC with Göbekli Tepe, and that puts it right in the age of Leo. And more about that too. There's people who think that the Great Sphinx was actually created in the age of Leo. Now it's not absolute, and it's only a rough hypotheses, but there are people who think that, based on pretty reasonable evidence, because the Sphinx enclosure is a lot older than what they say it is. I mean, there's people who get into that. Graham Hancock and John Anthony West and those guys all get into that deeper. But the enclosure of the Sphinx was exposed to heavy, heavy rain in that area, which is now desert, wasn't exposed to rain for thousands of years prior to when they say it was built. But now, one thing about the Sphinx being built in this age, the Ice Age also ended. The Ice Age ended at around the same time, 10,000 BC. So there's actually people out there who think the Sphinx was built a whole cycle before that, so about 35,000 years or so, roughly. I'm just conjuring that off the top of my head based on the 25,920 year precession. And so what some people think is that the Sphinx was actually carved not in this past age of Leo, but the one previous to that. But again, it's just speculation. But so the Ice Age ended at about this time. We had this confirmed structure of Göbekli Tepe at 10,000 BC, the age of Leo, at the same time. The Sphinx was built, I put a question mark after that, around this time. So we have fairly clear evidence of, advanced human activity happening, what would be the golden age in this chart here. And that's that. Now, one thing about that, I call this the Spear of Destiny. There's a couple things I really want to get to, because it is a Spear of Destiny. You can call it a spear too, but you could also call it a giant dick or a phallus. Because one thing, I just noticed this recently. And this is sort of just a weird way I described this aspect, but on the Osiron tarot spiral, as I've said 1,000 times, the way this axis is derived is the first two cards of here, the High Priestess and the Magus, form the 3. It goes around to the 6, and the Chariot and Strength form the 6 of this card. And then when it comes around again, I always said, because these two houses form a 10, I always just said if you take that 1 and add it to the 6, that's how you get 7. But it's obvious, if that's a 3, this number is a 7. So the 7 lands there anyway. You don't have to do anything to it to get that 7. So it starts with a 3 with these cards. These two cards form the 6, and it goes around. And these 4 cards, the Tower, Star, Moon, and the Sun, give you directly the 7. And then when you add all those numbers up, it comes to 16, which is the exploding phallic tower. Okay, so there is no, you don't have to play with the numbers to get the 637 aspect. It derives itself naturally. And then when you add them up, it becomes 16, which reduces to 7. And 16 is the tower, and we've always seen. So this could either be the Spear of Destiny, if you want to be nice about it, call it the Spear of Destiny, or you could call it the Cosmic Phallus. Either one, it's the same thing. And so that's that. And one other thing I want to clear up about this, again, in the first video of this, I sort of was so hot to get it out, I may have been a little premature with it. And one of the things is, if you recall, the cherubic signs precess with air, water, fire, and earth. And we see air, water, fire, and earth. And you also see how the queens, how the court cards are dominant with the cherubic sign. So if this is cherubic water, and the queens are dominant here, which is water. In this section, the kings are dominant, and this is cherubic fire. Well, now the princes are cherubic, so you got cherubic earth here, but the other prince is cherubic air, and that fills in this realm here. So, but the only difference with that is the cherubic earth is outside of the Saturnian realm, and cherubic air falls into the Saturnian realm. So now when you see the number sequence of 0, 1, 2, and 3, which gives you a 6 for the masculine mask of Kundalini, well, that is justified because this Saturnian realm is the equivalent to the 0 realm. This is basically a 0 realm because of life. Again, I get into that in the other video, but this is the 0 realm here. So if life emerges while it's still in this realm, it dies. Or Kundalini never awakens if you go in the processional way. So the air realm, the air aspect of the element, the cherubic air, falls in the Saturnian realm of 0, and then you got the water, fire, and earth after that, and it corresponds to its is congruent with what it is. So 1 is feminine for water, 2 is masculine, and fire is masculine. 3 is the Empress, which is pregnant with life, and then the earth is pregnant with life. So it's completely congruent with this formula of 0, 1, 2, 3 with the cherubics, based on the fact that cherubic air falls into the Saturnian realm. Okay. One other aspect that I really needs to be mentioned too is Saturn. Saturn is always regarded as a masculine figure. And as we see over here, every planet has both a feminine and a masculine aspect. But when it comes to Saturn, Saturn is regarded as a masculine god. I mean, when you think of Saturn, most people think of a masculine god, Father Time and all that. But Saturn doesn't have an absolute masculine aspect. It only has completely feminine or androgyne. There is no absolute masculine aspect. As a matter of fact, when you factor the court cards into the signs and the elements, the only 2 planets that do show an absolute masculine aspect is Jupiter and Mercury. And you see Jupiter here that has a completely masculine aspect with Sagittarius and the king. And then the other one is Mercury with the king and then this house up here. So the only ones that show completely masculine are Jupiter and Mercury. And Saturn, which is regarded as masculine, is actually feminine. So if you want to regard, Saturn, the god of the Jew, the Saturnian god of the Jew, is really feminine. It's really feminine at heart completely, and only shows a masculine aspect. It's sort of like Shiva and Shakti. It's the same exact thing as Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is the masculine expression of what is the greater Shakti. And it also shows with the rest of my work that the feminine precedes the masculine. the masculine is only a means of expression, but the greater eternal aspect of life is feminine. And it shows that with Saturn. So Saturn, you would be within your right to refer to Saturn as a goddess rather than a god. I think that's basically it. Well, here's the cards that form the axis of the Great Lord. You got the 6, Chariot and Strength. The 3 is derived from the High Priestess and the Magus, and the Tower is from the 7 comes from the Tower, the Star, and the Moon, and the Sun, and they all combine to form the Tower again. So this can either be considered the Spear of Destiny or the Cosmic Phallus. And right now, this presentation is shown in a view that's more congruent with, right now I have this displayed showing the sun rising and going around. But if you switch this to its view for a normal zodiac chart and turn it over, the angle would go up this way and it would switch the rotation to it. Everything would be reversed. But the reason I do it this way is because I'm showing the journey of the sun. So it's not, we're calling this the abyss and this is the sun rising. That's why I show it like that. But a normal astrological chart has it reversed. A normal astrological chart has Aries, Taurus, and the rest going down and going in a counterclockwise motion, and that would reverse the precession too. So this is just a simpler way to view it. It's just a perspective thing. That's all it is. But so I'm pretty sure that's it. This is just sort of an addition to that other video. I just wanted to clear up some key points that I didn't clear up in the other video. One of them is that, but the biggest thing is just the timeline of humanity. All of our history that we know about, or that you'll learn about in school, begins at this demarc point from Sumeria all the way to the present day. But now, again, as I said, we have new evidence. There is new solid evidence that show action happening, thousands of years prior to Sumeria too. So remember, each of these is 2,000 years. So we're seeing 2, 4, 6,000 years of time, which is basically the same time span from Sumeria to now. So we got 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. That's from Sumeria to now, in the same exact span of time going the other way, 246, is when we're seeing evidence for a lot of things going on. With the Ice Age ending, the Sphinx question mark built, but the most solid evidence of everything I have over here is the site of Göbekli Tepe. That is confirmed. That is as solid as you get, basically. And it shows advanced human civilization activity at 10,000 BC. And there's also a global structure. There's a lot of structures in the world that quackademia discounts, but they're ancient. They're the oldest of the structures built, and they're also the most advanced and sophisticated. And we see that all over the world. South America, we see it in Egypt. We see it in Japan, everywhere, all over the place. We're seeing these structures that can't be explained or anything like that. And God knows when they were built in this timeline, but that's what that's what people are working on right now, to try to get to the bottom of the truth of human activity, and trying to rediscover a past that is either hidden purposely or just hasn't been discovered yet. But the timeline, our human story isn't finished, it's not complete, and what we know about ourselves isn't disclosed accurately. And this goes to Texas. In Texas, there's a structure called the Rock Wall in Texas that is clearly advanced engineering, and no one knows about it. I myself only looked into it sort of superficially, but there's other people who present work on that. But there's a gargantuan fucking wall in Texas that is clearly not created by means that we understand. So So this is that. So thanks for watching, and namaste. This is going to be pretty amazing, I think. There's a lot going on. I'm actually going to link... There's actually two segments to this. The first part is going to be, I'm going to link the tarot to actual hard science in atomic structure and the true nature of polarity via electricity. And then the next part, after the second part, is going to be based on the number 12 in the relationship to numbers, but I'll save that for that section. Okay, now we see here the Wheel of the Zodiac again. This is left over from the last video. You see the axis of the Great Lord here with the court cards surrounding it, and that goes in a processional vortex. What you see here is my crude example drawing of an atom, and you have the protons and neutrons in the middle and the circling electrons outside. And the reason I have that here is because the court cards of the tarot show us atomic structure. Okay, you'll see here on the staff of Hermes that is made up of this axis of the Great Lord here. You'll notice one thing, and this jumped out at me a couple days ago, and this really set off a chain of thought. You're going to notice that the kings don't share with anybody else, and they form a square, a perfectly even square. And if you were to stack this up to infinity, it would always go king, 2 spaces, king, 2 spaces, king. It would keep doing that. And it would be perfectly squared when you do that. And then if you look, you'll notice, now if the kings don't share with anybody, that obviously means the queens and the princes always share with each other. So the queens are here and the princes are here. They always share. It's always the queen and the prince together. And what is that? The queen is the mother and the prince is her child. And the king is the man. Okay. Now, there's one difference on this that is different from every other version of the staff of Hermes that I've drawn up until now. And that you'll notice is that I have the positive in blue here next to the queen. And why is that? Because we all know that electricity, positive is masculine, negative is feminine, and neutral is just neutral, right? We all know that. We all know that current flows from positive to negative. Everybody knows that. Well, what everybody knows is fucking wrong. That's not what goes on. And I just learned this recently because I've been, because of all these videos, I've wanted to learn more about exactly what we know about electricity. And I learned one thing a couple weeks ago that really changed everything, is that current doesn't flow from positive to negative. Current flows from what we call negative to the positive. That's how current flows. Now every schematic on electricity has it showing the current flow from positive to negative, but that's not the case. Current flows from negative to positive. Okay, so now up here I have the true operation of what's going on via the aspects of electricity and their sexual orientation, if you want to call it that. Up here we have the queen, and the feminine is positive. Okay, and the positive aspect of electricity is an attractive force. And we all know that women are naturally attractive creatures. I mean, if you're a beautiful woman, the world is going to be at your doorstep offering you everything that you can possibly want. That's just the way it is. I mean, there's no such thing as a lonely, beautiful woman. The only way a woman who's really beautiful is going to be lonely is just because every guy that comes at her is just completely, she's so overwhelmed by the onslaught of attention that, she's lonely in a different way than a man will be lonely. A woman's going to be lonely for authenticity, not attention. Now, a man, on the other hand, will be lonely for anything, because when a man is lonely, he's lonely because he just doesn't have anybody in his life. But a beautiful woman is not going to have that problem. So, the positive aspect of electricity is an attractive force. The king's, or the masculine aspect, is negative, and that is it's a force that repels. So the masculine repels and the feminine attracts. Okay. and the neutral is neutral. So now when you change that, it changes the nature of electricity, and it also changes the nature of the current flow, because current flows from negative to positive, which the negative in this case is masculine, to positive. So the electrons, so when you apply this to an atom, the queens are going to be the protons, the princes are going to be the neutrons, and the kings are going to be the electrons. So you have the queens and the princes, or the protons and neutrons inside the center of the atom here, the nucleus. Okay, this is where the protons and neutrons go, and the electrons or the kings are circling outside of that. Okay, and that's the nature of the atomic structure. And that is the court cards. The court cards are showing you this relationship, because the queens and the protons are together, and the kings are isolated by themselves outside of it. So we're seeing this amazing correlation to that. So, but that's a pretty significant thing about electricity, because electricity is, the way electricity is presented to us in textbooks is fucking wrong. Clearly wrong. And there's even, it even goes deeper than that. If you look into the works of Walter Russell, his ideas of electricity are a lot different than convention too. And but the idea that the nature of electricity was written to be masculine favorable and masculine dominant shows how all of our history was written to be masculine favorable and masculine dominant. So in our world, even in fucking hard science, I mean, there isn't much more hard science than atomic structure and electricity. Those are the key foundations of scientific thought, basically, electricity and atomic structure. And even those concepts were written and designed favorable to the masculine. And the same thing in mythology and religion, all of it. This goes back to at least the time of Abrahamism, when this evil cult took over the world and started doing their damage and spreading throughout all the lands and destroying the people and the culture and the beliefs there. Because once upon a time, the world was in harmony with nature and its maternal superiority. It's not even superiority, because it's not about that. See, the idea that there's a superior aspect is sort of ridiculous, because it's not really like that. All of the components work together. The protons and the neutrons, or the queens and the princes, need the electrons doing their proper job. So it's not a case of the feminine is superior. It's putting the proper reason for existence in order, because the feminine principle at root is the principle of beauty, and the electrons or the kings are supposed to be the servant, or the knight are supposed to be the servant for the greater beauty. And we're seeing this in atomic structure here. Very, very powerful. This video has been a long time coming. I'm going to focus on the tarot pips today. And I'm going to show you that the tarot pips are by far the most messed up aspect of the tarot that there is. I mean, there is just really no way to fix the tarot pips without completely reconstructing the pips. So in regards to the tarot pips, like for any tarot deck that has pictures with them, like the Wake deck and Golden Dawn decks and stuff like that, or other decks that have pictures with them, you're better off treating the pips as like oracle cards, because the meanings that are associated with them are derived from two main sources. One of them is the Kabbalistic tree of death and stagnation, and the other one is the zodiac and the planetary placements on the wheel of the zodiac. But now, when you analyze that, what you see is, first you have to say, why is the planetary, why are the planetary assignments assigned to any given card? A perfect example is like the first card that we would see here would be the Two of Wands. It would begin that, and Mars rules that, because it begins with Mars. Here's the planetary orders, because you really have to ask yourself, why are the planets in the order they're in, and what does that really mean at the end of the day? And here's a traditional order for the planets. They go like this. Starts out with Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, Saturn, and Jupiter. And all that does is it begins in Aries and it loops around the entire zodiac, repeating until it runs out, and it ends where it started with the same one that started it, with Mars finishing up the circuit. In the last card that would be here in the traditional tarot keys would be the Ten of Cups, and that would be Mars in there. So the tarot pips derive their meanings from the false tree and this planetary layout. But now that layout, I'm postulating that is a false layout. Now I've read in other Kabbalistic books that the real New Year, or in the ancient times, the real New Year would have fell on 0 degrees of Leo. And if you use that planetary sequence, it starts out like this. So if you're starting at 0 degrees Leo, it begins with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. And if you do that, it would of course begin and end with Saturn. If you shift it to Aries where it belongs, you're going to move all that around and shift it to Aries. It would begin and end with Saturn. But there's some flaws with this as to that, and I'll get to that. But now, if in pondering this, you have to ask yourself, why are the planets in the order they are, and what does it mean? And it basically doesn't mean much of anything the way it is. But now, if you use the planetary order that is found on the zodiac itself, and then use that is a much better formula for the planetary orders. And that is simply the way the planets appear on the axis of the Great Lord. If you remember from the earlier videos in this series, there's an axis line that all the planets are mirrored on the zodiac, and that runs from between Cancer and Leo, and then it splits the two houses of Saturn on the bottom. And that planetary order is almost the same as 0 degrees Leo, but there are some differences. So the 3-6 axis, of course, begins with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, and ends with the Sun. Now there is one other aspect to that planetary order that sort of gives it a valid nature. It sort of reveals something within it. Now if you're looking at this planetary order, and if you remember from the Staff of Hermes in the earlier videos, how every planet has a positive and negative aspect, and then when you combine that with the tarot court cards, there's only a couple planets that have an absolute masculine presentation, and that is Jupiter and Mercury. The rest of them, and there's a lot of other planets that have the cherubics. So when you're looking at the zodiac, the cherubics are very important, as I've pointed out in earlier videos. But if you analyze in this order sequence, the 3-6 axis order sequence, it begins with Saturn, which has a cherubic aspect. It ends with the Sun, which also has a cherubic aspect. In dead center is with Venus, which also has a cherubic aspect. So when you take away those 3 planets, you're left with 4 planets. You got Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and the Moon. Now only one of those 4 planets has a cherubic aspect, and that is Mars. Mars is the final planet that has a cherubic aspect. So now what you're left with is, in this of these 2 planets, one of them is not cherubic, and that's Jupiter. And now these 2, both of these are not cherubic, and that gives you a 2. So it sort of reveals a 1 and a 2 in this planetary sequence. And it just so happens that the cards that don't have the cherubic influence, the Jupiter has a completely masculine presentation. Mercury has a completely masculine presentation, and the moon has a completely feminine presentation. Okay, the rest of them have a cherubic aspect somewhere along the line. And now, if you do that and you lay out the ring of planets until it ends, it's going to begin with Saturn, and it's going to loop all the way around again and end with Saturn. Well, if you recall, the zodiac begins and ends with Saturn when you use the axis of the Great Lord and use it in its precession cycle as seen in the Spear of Destiny. It begins with Capricorn, which is Saturn, and it goes around in a precession, and it ends in Aquarius again with Saturn. So this is congruent with the very theme of Saturn being the goddess of life. Now, when it comes to that, I just want to add a quick thing about that. Saturn, why is Saturn worshipped as a god? Now, there's an excellent video series, and this sort of goes into a whole new line of thought, but why is Saturn revered as a god or a goddess? Well, there's actually a theory out there, it's called the Purple Dawn theory, and that theory postulates that Saturn was at one time a brown dwarf star, and the planets that were associated with it in the beginning were Mars, and then Earth was a part of that planetary aspect. And there's videos on this. This goes hand in hand. This meshes with the electric universe theory too. And there's a lot of presentations on this, and it's actually very, very plausible. And what happened was, at one point in time, our sun that we have today captured Saturn in its orbits, and Mars and Earth in its orbits, and then Venus was there later, and then that's why we have the solar system we have today. But at one time, in our recorded past, that Saturn was actually our star. And the reason I say in our recorded past is because the ancients knew this. That's why the ancients revere Saturn as a god and all the things like this. Because if you look at, there's a video series called something like I forget exactly what it is, but it goes hand in hand with the electric universe theory. It's something alien sky, and it gets into the idea that Saturn was a brown dwarf star, and that Mars and Venus, later Venus appeared in the scene, and it shows why some of the symbols are used the way they are and stuff like that. It's really fascinating, very fascinating. But getting back to the Purple Dawn theory, there's a lot of powerful reasons on our planet that kind of fit that model very well. And one of them is the creatures that are native to this planet. Most of them have great eyesight at night, and the plants of this planet respond very well to red light. They don't really need the full spectrum of the sun's light. Most of them, they can get fine with just the red light, and that's what it would have been. Because the reason they call it the Purple Dawn theory is because the brown dwarf star with Mars and Earth in it was surrounded by a plasma sheath that's shaped like an egg. So that's where the cosmic egg theories come from, because at one time we were in the envelope of the plasma field of Saturn, and we didn't have days and nights like we have today, because it was all a constant glowing light. There was no days and nights. It was always the same. The temperature was the same. It was just a sort of like a perpetual twilight. And it is really, really fascinating how they come to these conclusions, and how the evidence actually supports it very well. It's very fascinating. And that is why Saturn is revered as the mother goddess that she is, because at one time she was our star, a brown dwarf star. So, now there is an alternative method that I made up myself how you could use the tarot, because basically what all this means is the planetary assignments to the tarot are basically arbitrary. The reason why some cards have a bad connotation is because usually the planetary aspect that goes along with it is negative. And a perfect example is 0 degrees Leo. The card that goes there is the 5 of Wands. And the reason it's negative is because the occultists like to associate Saturn in a context, a bad context. So 0 degrees Leo is a 5 of Wands. But there's no way to really remember all the planetary placements without just, getting into your mind what the cards are. You just sort of remember what they are. There is no real formula to really remember what planetary placement goes where, other than just to recall through experience what they are. But I made up another way, because if you're assuming that planetary placements are arbitrary, well, you might as well develop, in that case, a structure that isn't arbitrary. And this is sort of an alternate method that you could use with the tarot if you're out in the field doing readings and you want to just pull information from the top of your head and you're using cards that don't have pictorial significance. Because nowadays, if you're using like a weight deck, the pictures tell a story, so you might as well just use them as oracle cards, and whatever the picture is saying, just use that. Perfect example is like the Four of Cups. There's significance within that picture that suggests things, or the Ten of Swords, or any of those cards, just use them as oracle cards, basically, because the meanings that are derived from them are from two faulty structures: a bad planetary order in the zodiac, and then the Tree of Death and Stagnation on the Kabbalistic Tree of Death and Stagnation. So there's no way to fix the pips, is what I'm getting at. So another way to do it is just to use the numbers and how they relate to the planets of the week. So in this case, it would be, the order would be the days of the week. It would be Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, the Sun, and then to finish it up with 8 and 9, I will just use the 8 as Earth, and then 9 would be like the cosmos. 9 would be everything. So I put the alpha and the omega signal there. And when you do it that way, the numbers would always be fixed. So every time you draw a 5, it would always be Venus. Every time you draw a 4, it would always be Jupiter. Anytime you draw a 1, it would always be the Moon, and so on and so forth. 8 would always be Earth, 9 would always be the cosmos, Saturn would always be 6, and so on and so on. And that's how it would go. So that way, if you're doing readings out in the world, you don't have to try to think of what planetary placement goes where. It'll be fixed every time. So that's sort of an alternate method you could use. And the reason I put that in there, is like I said before, is because the planetary assignments are arbitrary. They don't mean anything. The only reason they're there is because of they just randomly fall in that position when you circle the zodiac with the planetary orders you use. But by far, of what I've figured out so far, the best planetary system to use, and the one that makes the most sense, is the 3-6 axis, which is derived from the zodiac itself. So if you use that, it's going to be congruent with itself. So that's how that goes. And now, another thing that I want to get to is the tarot keys. The tarot pips are numbered 1 through 10. Okay, that's how they are. And as we know from the previous works, that is a false order. And what happens when you do that, that shows you why the tarot court cards are presented in an offset manner. Because in the official tarot, or Golden Dawn or Kabbalistic tarot, the deacons, the court cards are offset by a deacon. And there's no legitimate reason for that at all, because I've looked at that and there isn't one. So, but the reason why that it's doing that is they could have been telling you, they could have been showing you that the number sequence is out of phase, because how it goes in the tarot, in the traditional tarot, is the aces count as 1, the aces are assigned to each quadrant. But then it begins with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then ends in 10. Well, if you look at excuse me. If you look at the greater number sequence, that 10 will ultimately reduce to a 1, and then it shifts the whole thing back by a deacon, just like the court cards are presented, offset by a deacon. So then it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this 10 would turn into a 1. So everything's offset. But when you fix it and use the proper code and put 1 where it belongs here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it begins with a 1 and ends with a 9 the way it should be. And what happens when you do that, as we've seen in other works, is it presents what I'm now calling the Osiron square. Is it presents the numbers, the cherubics will be 1, 4, 7. I'm sorry, the cardinals will be 1, 4, 7. The cherubics are 2, 5, 8. And the other ones are 3, 6, and 9. And this also presents the vortex math number groups, 1, 4, 7, 2, 5, 8, 3, 6, 9. And it also presents the square, if you recall from the vortex math video, the vortex math and the 2D cube. And there's a section on that where I get into the Saturn, the cube of Saturn. And then I show how the numbers produce their own cube. Well, this is revealing that here as well. And it shows the number sequence in its normal pattern, with the feminine taking the corners in the center and the masculine taking the supporting center roles. But if you do it with the other way, beginning with the 2 and ending with 10, it locks it up just like the Saturn square does, where it puts the masculine in the corners in the center, but it takes the 1, because the 1 reduces to a 1, and that's obviously feminine. But remember, the expression of the 10 is a masculine expression of the 1-0 combination in this case, because it's an even number. So before 10 is broken down, it has a masculine face, and that's what's being presented here with the 10 in the corner. So it's sort of producing a false number grid that is harmonized with the toxic cube of Saturn as well. So there's a lot of negativity in this misaligned construct. So it's very important to fix the pips and put the order the way it belongs. So the tarot pips, truthfully, should follow the order of the single digit code, 0 through 9, and the ace should be regarded as 0, and the rest of the numbers 1 through 9 should be used for the lower pips. That's how it should be. But again, the tarot decks out there are designed and they're built upon the false construct. See, the tarot trumps you can fix, the court cards, they can be fixed, but the tarot pips are so fucked up that there's no way to fix them without completely redoing the system. Because it's the core of it, at its root, the foundation is bogus from every concept, from every construct that you try to rationalize why the number sequences for the pips are the way they are. So short of completely reworking the tarot pips is what you would really have to do to fix it. You might as well just use your existing tarot decks as oracle decks. Don't worry about the occult significance as it's presented, because it's false. So because you're using shit, so the pips are designed using a shit system right now, and there's no way to fucking fix it without complete reconstruction. Basically, is what all this means. So this is called the Tarot Pip Smackdown. It's showing the various planetary orders and why they are the way they are. It's also highlighting an alternate method, the Osiron Tarot Spiral method, which would just use 1 through 9, and most of those are denoted to the planets of the week, and then the extras would be the Earth 8, and then the Alpha Omega or the Cosmos card, which would be 9. And when you do it this way, it's beautiful, because the ace is 0, and the 9 is sort of like the fucking 0 unmasked, as I say before, because 9 is 0 unmasked. So this is that. So this is the tarot pips broken down in a way that tries to make sense of something that is just so messed up at its core that it's virtually unsalvageable the way it is now. So because if you try to use the new meanings, the proper planetary order, or even the Osiron order, but if you use the 3-6 axis order, that's going to completely throw off the meanings of every card. Because this is beginning with Mars, and that's sort of like a very hostile, and that's a hostile way to begin the sequence, because Mars is the god of war. So you're basically setting the stage for warfare. You know what I mean? But if you do it right and put Saturn here where it belongs, Saturn is just the mother goddess of everything that is, basically. And it begins with Saturn, it goes around, and it ends with Saturn. And that's a much more proper way to do it. It's congruent with the zodiac itself. Everything's congruent when you do it this way, using the axis, the 3-6 axis as your planetary orders. And it even reveals a 1 and a 2 in the sequence that gives you the 12 of the zodiac. So I think I'm fairly confident that my methods for the pips, as along with the whole Osiron tarot spiral, are going to be, you know, the model for what the tarot is, because the Osiron tarot spiral tarot system is the most perfect tarot system in existence by and far. There isn't a tarot system out there that can touch the Osiron tarot spiral tarot system, because it's a complete system from beginning to end, and I've never seen anything that even comes close to it. So thank you and namaste. Yesterday I just released a video, the Tarot Pip Smackdown, and it would figure that after I released that video I figured out the secret of the planetary order. So I'm going to cover that today. What we see here is the full wheel of the zodiac, and you've seen a few other things. Now here is the axis of the Great Lord planetary order, the 3-6 axis planet order, and that starts out with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, and then the Sun. And we see that here on the axis of the Great Lord, the 3-6 axis. It starts out with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and then the Moon and the Sun cap it off. And the planets mirror on each side of that 3-6 axis. And real quickly, I realize I've covered this probably 1,000 times, but I like to, there's some key points I like to cover again and again. And one of them is how this 3-6 axis is derived. It's derived from the tarot cards that go there on the Osiron tarot spiral. The High Priestess and the Magus, card 1 and 2, form a 3 for that. It goes around, cards 7 and 8 form 15, that reduces to a 6, and that gives you the 3-6 axis. And then when it comes around again, the 4 cards that land in this house, in these two houses again, the Tower, Star, Moon, and the Sun form 7 directly. So that's how you get the 3-6 axis with the 7 connotation of the blood after that. So that's how that axis comes to be, and the planets mirror each other on that axis. And now if you use that planetary order, it really makes the planetary significance come alive in a much better way. See, yesterday I was using the idea that Aries begins a year, and on the traditional planetary order it begins with Mars, it goes around again and ends with Mars. So I sort of equated that with the Saturn too. I figured, okay, well if Aries, well if this begins the whole thing and it starts out with Mars being false, well you just put Saturn there as well. And you begin it here, you begin Saturn here, you go around and it ends with Saturn. Well, there is one spot in the zodiac wheel where it would make more sense to begin with Saturn and end with Saturn. And that just happens to be in the houses of Saturn. Right here, you got Capricorn and Aquarius. And this is the best place where you could start with Saturn because you're in Saturn, and it goes around again, and it finishes with Saturn in Saturn. So it's 100% congruent. And as we saw from the Spear of Destiny, in the Cosmic Phallus, the one that followed that, Saturn begins in Capricorn and it precesses around and it ends with Aquarius and Saturn again. So this is perfect. This is telling you that everything begins from Saturn. So when you begin the sequence of planets from the 3-6 axis with Saturn, it goes through the planets, and then the Sun makes its first appearance on the first decan of Aries. So the first time the Sun appears is in the first decan of Aries, where the Sun is born again anew for the new year. Okay? And the Sun is also exalted in Aries. But when it comes to the planetary exaltations, I haven't looked into that enough to figure out if that's BS or not. But the standard model is that the sun is exalted in Aries. When you use this proper layout, the sun makes its first appearance in Aries, and then it goes around again, and then Jupiter makes its appearance, not its first appearance, but Jupiter makes an appearance as it breaks from spring into summer. Jupiter is the first planet that breaks into the summer, and Jupiter is also exalted in Cancer too. So we see now two pretty significant correlations. We got the sun breaking into Aries, and then Jupiter is a planet of bounty, of giving, of prosperity, and that's making it seen, the Father of God, and Jupiter makes it seen here. Now, if you remember, actually this just came to mind right now, if you remember, these two houses down here form a 2 and a 7, and when you combine them they form 9. Well, up here, these cards, when you combine them, card offhand I can't think what they are, but they've combined to form a 13 and then reduced to a 4. So there's a 9 down here, and the 4 heads this up. Well, Jupiter is number 4. Jupiter is assigned with 4. 4 is Jupiter in the days of the week. Thursday is Jupiter. So we see this here. Then it goes around again, and then once we break into autumn, Venus heads up the charge, and Venus rules Libra anyway. So now we see this, and then it goes around again, and it breaks back into the womb or the winter again to start over. And the moon heads this up. And if you recall, the high priestess rightfully belongs in Capricorn as the archetypal feminine principle, the high priestess, and she is associated with the moon. So now we see the moon head this off. So when you use this, the planetary order that comes from the zodiac itself on the axis of the Great Lord, and you start where it belongs in Saturn, it tells you that. Saturn begins it and Saturn ends it, and it goes around. It really makes everything come alive in a much better way. Now, one more aspect. I think this is the only house that does this, but Venus shows up in every one of her houses. So Venus rules Taurus and Libra, okay? And Taurus is right here, and we see Venus in the cherubic deacon position, Venus. Then we go around to Libra. Venus starts out in the cardinal position, and the other house that is associated with Venus is Pisces. And Venus is exalted in Pisces, and Venus shows up again in the cardinal position of Pisces as well. And also in the tarot, in the sort of official tarot, the one that's presented to the masses, the moon card typically is shown to reside in Pisces. Well, the last card, or the last planet to show up in Pisces is the moon. So now, was that a hint of the truth, or was that just a coincidence? Who knows? But so we're seeing a much better, much more proper demonstration of the planetary assignments when you use the axis of the Great Lord and begin with Saturn and loop it around. And also, one other thing about this, when you do this, Saturn is the only planet that shows up 6 times in the wheel. So Saturn is here, and it's times 6. Saturn is the only one that has 6 placements on the wheel. All the rest of the planets, which total 6 in number, only show up 5 times. And that gives you the heart of the tree and the jewel. So all of the planets besides Saturn are 6 in total, which is the heart of the jewel, and they appear 5 times, which is the heart of the true tree. And we see this over here. 36 divided by 7 equals 5.14. And it's showing that all of these planets show up 5 times, except for Saturn, which shows up 6. But so 5.14, now there's a bunch of ways you can look at that. You could say that's close enough to just call it even 5, or you could say it's 5.1, and then when you add 5 plus 1, that equals 6. Or you could say the 5.14 is like 2 5s. So there's a bunch of ways you can look at that, but that's interesting. And this is also the heart of the true tree, and the pentagram, and the word itself, 5, is very similar to phi, and we know that 5 is a very, very important number in occult circles. And it's funny how in the occult presentations that have been handed down to us, Saturn is almost always presented in a very negative light, and so isn't the number 5. See, in the tarot, every 5 card in the tarot, pips at least, every 5 card in the tarot pips is a very negative card, regardless of what planet goes there. It doesn't really matter what planet falls in there. It's just 5 is associated with a very negative card. Well, is this a sign of occult shenanigans? I think it is. Because Saturn, as we've seen over and over again, Saturn isn't this evil monster masculine god. It's actually a feminine goddess, and it's the source of everything, as we see as it shows up in the zodiac. And as I covered in the video yesterday, there's actually a lot of real reasons why Saturn is revered as a god or goddess in this, in our cosmology and the origins of humans. Because in that cosmology I laid out in the video, one thing I forgot to mention is that human beings aren't native to this planet. And there's a lot of theories that suggest why that is. But one of them in that theory is that we actually were we were actually from one of the planets that was in the sun's solar system on a moon of Jupiter. Is the postulation. I can't think of the exact planet that it is, but the speculation is that one of Jupiter's moons was actually habitable, and we actually came from there. And for some reason, we ended up coming to Earth to inhabit Earth at some point in the evolution of the cosmology. And Mars, also shows signs of habitation. Now, one of the reasons Saturn could have a bad light, because as I mentioned yesterday, it's Saturn, the purple dawn theory. One of the problems with that scenario is that every now and then the brown dwarf star that was Saturn would flare up angrily and wipe out everything. You know what I mean? And that is what some people think happened to Mars, is that Mars was inhabited, and then at some point the brown dwarf sun that was Saturn flared up and it wiped out Mars, and then it either spared the people on Earth or the people who moved to Earth or whatever happened. But so that could be one of the reasons why Saturn is regarded in a bad light like that. Or that could also be another reason why the Kali Yuga is associated, or Kali is associated with death and destruction, because, well, the Saturn goddess flares up every now and then and destroys everything in her wrath. And so there's a lot going on with that purple dawn theory. But yeah, so this is a quick video. I just wanted to show you that the planetary zodiac order, it looks like it's been solved, because when you use it in the proper way, it works out much, much better, using the axis of the Great Lord as its demarc point for Saturn to begin, to go around, and then end with Saturn. I'm going to show you that this is indeed the true planetary sequence, and it confirms itself so perfectly and so beautifully as to leave it completely irrefutable. So if I do my job properly, it will be absolutely irrefutable, because this thing is like it's like all the other structures that use the single digit code. When you dial it in and get it right, it reveals itself as perfect, and this is no exception. So let's get started. Alright, this is called the Planetary Deacon Deception. And again, we see the full zodiac wheel with the proper planetary sequence that begins with Saturn on the axis of the Great Lord, and it loops around and it ends with Saturn again. and it's using the houses of Saturn as its demarc point. Because the postulation is that the planetary sequence for the deacons that is popular in occult circles and used in the tarot is wrong. And that sequence begins in its traditional presentation. It begins in Aries with Mars, and it loops around, and it ends in Pisces with Mars again. Well, that is false. And some of the examples I gave in the previous video were only a couple, because at that time it was still new. Like one of them was that the sun makes its first appearance in Aries, and the sun is born in Aries. Another is Jupiter takes the cardinal position here, and the 9 at the bottom of the Osiron Tarot spiral combined with the 4 forms 13, which reduces to a 4. And then Venus shows up on the scene in how she rules, and then the moon down here shows up in where the High Priestess reigns in her rightful house of Capricorn. Well, when you do that, when you lay that out in the proper sequence, what you'll notice if you look at it long enough is that every house has a specific combination of planets. Example being, it begins in Aquarius, and Aquarius starts out with Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Well, every single house shares that planetary sequence with one other house, except for the 2 houses on top of the axis of the Great Lord, and that is Cancer and Leo. These 2 houses have a unique and distinct planetary sequence all their own, and they do not share with any other house. All the rest of the houses share with one other house. And I have it written out over here what those are. And I began where it began. So what that means is this isn't just thrown up there without any rhyme or reason. This is using the basic order of operations to get this. So I start in Aquarius where it begins on the axis of the Great Lord. And the planetary sequence for Aquarius is also shared with Virgo, and that is Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. And the next one is Pisces and Libra. They share a set. Scorpio and Aries and Scorpio share their set. Taurus and Sagittarius share their set, and this house in Capricorn share their set. So that's 5 houses that share their set. And that gives you a planetary sequence here that begins with Saturn. It also ends with Saturn in that sequence, and in the dead center of it is Saturn. So Saturn starts it, Saturn ends it, and in the very dead center is Saturn. And out of all these houses, which is a total of 10 houses, and if you recall, Saturn is associated with 10. As a matter of fact, on the Osiron Tarot spiral, the houses of Capricorn and Aquarius, if you add up all the tarot cards that go there, they reduce to 10. Well, they reduce to 1, but they reduce to 1 via 10. So Saturn is ruled by 10. Saturn is associated with 10 in a lot of ways. This is one of them. And this is another one, because 10 houses belong to Saturn. And I just mentioned that these 2 houses don't share their planetary sequence with any other one. Well, they're also guarded by Saturn, because Saturn begins it down here in these 2 houses. Saturn has 2 more spots here, but Saturn never enters this area. These 2 houses are the height of summer. You have Cancer and Leo, and these are the height of summer. Saturn never enters that, but Saturn is standing guard right outside of them. So Saturn is the last deacon here, and Saturn is the first deacon here, standing guard over this place, and Saturn never enters it. These 3 planets begin with Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, and then Mercury, Moon, and the Sun. And interestingly enough, these planets, this one begins with one of the two planets that have a pure masculine presentation. And this does that. So Jupiter is one of the two planets that has a pure masculine presentation, and then it begins with Mars and Venus, and those are linked. You know, Mars and Venus, war and love. And then Mercury is the other planet that has a masculine presentation, and that begins the house of Leo. And then the other two planets that go there are the Moon and the Sun, which is the archetypal feminine and the archetypal masculine. Okay? So we're seeing powerful links with that. Now, what else happens when you do that? If you take the shared houses and you combine the ruling planets for each of those houses, example being Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and Libra is ruled by Venus. Now Mars, Aries and Scorpio are both ruled by Mars, and this is in the dead center of this construct is Mars and Mars. And now what we see in the last two is the exact mirror image of the previous two. So Taurus and Sagittarius is now Venus and Jupiter, and before that it was Jupiter and Venus. And the last two are Mercury and Saturn, which is the exact reverse of what began it with Saturn and Mercury. So this forms a pattern that is 100% symmetrical within itself. So you know what I mean? So it's completely, perfectly symmetrical and mirrored in what it presents. But that's not all. What it also does is reveals the order, the planetary sequence order when you do that too. So it starts out with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, and that's going down. And then the next pillar is going up with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. And that is how the planets go on the axis of the Great Lord. It starts out with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, and then the Sun and the Moon are separate on top and unique on top. So this is producing the planetary sequence going down and up. It's showing perfect symmetry in the construction of the planets. And it also shows the precessional vortex too. Because if you recall on the axis of the Great Lord, how it shows up with the Staff of Hermes, in the Spear of Destiny, I highlight this. It shows the precessional order, and it begins with the tarot court cards. It goes Queen, King, Prince, Queen, King, Prince, Queen, King, Prince, Queen, King, Prince. And that forms a precessional counterclockwise vortex. And this is doing the same exact thing with the planetary sequence. It's showing its precessional vortex. So now, what you'll see here, you may notice, I know there's a lot going on here, and it might be hard to make sense of it, but you'll see, every now and then, you'll see 666 show up. 666, and I'll tell you why that is. In the realm of Saturn, which in the 5 houses, or the 10 houses that Saturn has a direct presence in, or a direct presence in, the number of planets come to 15. So it takes 15 planets to get this sequence, okay? And 15 is the card of the devil, which is associated with, Satan, Saturn, Satan, and the devil. But we're seeing this here. So we're seeing 15 things, but that's 2. 15 times 2, because there's 2 of them, because it goes it goes through twice. And then in Cancer and Leo, there is 6 planetary characters that form up their planetary associations. So that gives you, the first 15 gives you a 6, the second 15 gives you a 6, and then Cancer and Leo give you a 6 directly, 4, 6, 6, and 6. And if you recall, if you used a proper number sequence for the tarot in each of the houses, each of the numbers reduce to 6. So 1, 2, 3 reduces to 6, 4, 5, 6 reduces to 6, and 7, 8, 9 reduces to 6. And that gives you a 6, 6, and 6 for each quadrant, which reduces to 18, and then 9, of course. So we're seeing another way that 666 comes into the picture, like that. And it's just absolutely stunning. And you might also notice, I circled, on this zodiac wheel here, I circled every time, I circled every place where Saturn appears, okay? So we started off in the beginning with 2 Saturns, and then Saturn shows up again in the cherubic decompositions of Mars and Scorpio. Saturn shows up, and then it ends in this house in the last position, and it shows up in Virgo in the first position, standing guard of the summer, as I said. But if you look at that, you may notice this looks an awful lot like an inverted pentagram, sort of skewed to the side a little bit. See, there's the top, there's the other ones, and then these two down here, it's as if they form a single point, and it looks like a pentagram, an inverted pentagram that's tilted on its side a little bit. So we're seeing some more of the so-called satanic mythology showing up in this construct here. And yeah, so that's amazing. Now, one other thing I want to point out too. This is pretty amazing. This is going to link it to the tarot in an amazing way. If you add up all of the cards, all of the houses in the realm of Saturn, which is 10 houses, the 10 houses of Saturn are these houses. If you add up all the house numbers for all those houses, it comes to 69, okay? And again, we see in Cancer that looks like a 69. But so it comes to 69. Now the houses of the summer, which is Cancer and Leo, is the 4th and the 5th house, and that adds to 9 directly. And if you also recall, 4 and 5, now that's pretty interesting that these would be isolated as 4 and 5, because 4 and 5, there's a lot going on with that. 4 is the elements, and 5 is the pentagram, which is the elements with divine spirit joined together. But it's also the heart, the center point of the Yggdrasil. If you watch those videos of the Yggdrasil, the center point of the 2D structure is occupied by the 4 and the 5. And we're seeing this here, 4 and 5 is showing up again in a powerful way. But if you add that 69, if you add this 9 to this 69, it gives you 78. And that is the number of tarot cards in a tarot deck. The 78 cards of the tarot. So if you add up every house 1 through 12, that adds to 78. So we're seeing another powerful link with the tarot and the zodiac. But now I just want to add this too, because this is important. Because again, when you see the 15 characters of the realms of Saturn, 15 of course reduces to 6. Okay, but if you add these 6 characters to that, 15 plus 6 is 21, and again, the tarot, the actual tarot trumps besides the Fool is 21. Okay, so we're seeing a 21 link with it too, which reduces to 3. So this 15 reduces to 6, and then the total of them all is 21, which reduces to 3. So again, we're seeing powerful numbers. Oh, and now one more thing too. I know I'm a little bit, scattered today, but it is the day after Thanksgiving, so. This 6 that is derived from the houses of Cancer and Leo, each of the houses has 3 planets, so that's 3 and 3, or 33 to give you the 6. So we're seeing another link to 33 too. And the reason I point this out is because on the True Tree of Life, if you recall, when you add the tarot keys, the Pillar of Yakin adds to 33 when you use the tarot cards, but the Pillar of Boaz adds to 39 before it reduces to a 3. Okay? And then if you take the houses, if you take all of the houses that Saturn actually resides in, which is only 6, if you add up all those house numbers, it adds to a total of 39, Well, the tarot trumps on the pillar of Boaz add to 39 directly before it reduces to 12, then 3, to give the 369 presentation of the tarot trumps on the video I Own the Tree of Life, which is a powerful video. That's one of the videos that started all this in the beginning. So we're seeing the link here with the true Tree of Life and the Zodiac and the Tarot. See all these linked together. Because if you recall from Osiron Tarot Spiral 3, Message of the Blood, the machinations of the code that the Tarot trumps reveal the true Tree of Life. And then, as I pointed out in the last video, the rest of the planets, which are 6 in total besides Saturn, show up 5 times on the wheel. Well, 6 times 5 is 30, but that 30 reduces to a 3, which gives you another 6-3 presentation. So we're seeing how this aspect of the planetary sequence also meshes with the single digit code and is showing you how that is. So this is a lot, this is huge. This is showing that this is the proper planetary sequence, and it confirms it so beautifully and powerfully as to be virtually irrefutable, because it's like a machine, it's like a gear. Once you dial it in and hit it right, it just comes alive perfectly, and it shows it. I mean, this is showing you so much in this construct up here, showing you the planetary sequence going down, then up in the processional vortex. It's got perfect symmetry. It's showing everything. I mean, the other way just does not do that. I mean, the other way is just off, because it doesn't form perfect symmetry, because it's off by 2 houses, because it begins in Aries and it's supposed to begin on the axis of the Great Lord, and it throws everything off when you do that. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it still forms a structure like this, because it still does the same thing with Mars. Like Mars will be here, Mars, and then Mars will be on the outside of the 2 planets that are, houses that are isolated there, which is Virgo and Libra. But it's just so fucking cockeyed and wrong, it's just ridiculous. And it's also showing too is that this is another example of occult bullshit. This is showing that the so-called occulted information that's being presented to the masses is fucking wrong. And this is another clear-cut example of that. So the true Tree of Life is fucking wrong and bullshit. The planetary deacon sequence is obviously wrong and bullshit. The tarot cube is wrong and bullshit. All of it is. And this is blowing the doors off of that myth too. And over here what I got is just, if you recall from part 6 of this, I gave an alternate version of the tarot trump planetary aspects. That's before I figured out this. And what that does, and here's how this works, because here's the sequence. The aces are 0, and then the planetary representations go along with the days of the week, and then 8 is Earth, and 9 is like the Cosmos card, for everything. It's sort of like the 0 unmasked. And this is how that works out on the Zodiac. 1, 2, 3 goes here, and the planet assignment goes along with it. But you sort of use that as a secondary aspect. So, as a matter of fact, you don't even really need to put these, because these are sort of implied by the number that goes with it, with the tarot. So when you use a proper number code, which is not going to be the same as the traditional tarot, you just take the number and you recognize that in the case of 5, like 5 will always be Venus. So when you draw the 5 of whatever, you'll know that Venus plays a part in that role somewhere. In the case of the 5 in Scorpio, or the 5 of Cups, Venus would show up, but Saturn also shows up in the 5 of Cups too.